Bernanke with VOA's Middle East Monitor. Coming up, Arab League monitors struggle as Syrian violence mounts. Did the Obama administration's strategy on the Arab Spring pay off? The U.S. is asking South Korea to cut Iran oil imports.
The Korean government is committed to strongly support and participate in international efforts to resolve this issue.
And Israeli websites are hit again in a cyber attack. It's all ahead on The Voice of America. The violence continues in Syria as Arab League monitors struggle to document developments. VOA's Elizabeth Arrett reports from the Syrian capital, Damascus.
It was another difficult day for Arab League monitors. One group, taken to hear evidence of unrest in areas just outside the capital, spent the morning listening to government official after government official tell of attacks against them. The group listened patiently, asking questions and seeking clarification. One case seemed particularly confusing. A sanitation official who said opposition forces in the rest of town of Douma were trying to sabotage their own water supply. The same monitors had a more trying experience the day before as they went beyond government-controlled areas to investigate an attack in Zabadani. The observers were welcomed as heroes, but soon found themselves fleeing under gunfire. Who fired the shots is unclear. The observers in their safety orange vests were meeting Monday just outside Damascus in a room decorated with portraits and photographs of President Bashar al-Assad and his father Hafez. The two men's combined 40-year family rule is what the uprising has been trying to end, first with peaceful protests, but increasingly with attacks by military defectors. With the Arab League mission faltering, United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon again lashed out against the violence, saying when a leader is disconnected from reality and from the people, such a situation is inevitable. Speaking in Abu Dhabi, Mr. Ban said he hoped the Security Council would handle the issue with gravity.
I know that there are some differences of opinions among the member states of the Security Council, but the number of casualties have reached to such an unacceptable stage. We cannot let this situation continue like this way. It's my urgent appeal.
There's been little consensus internationally on intervening in the Syrian crisis, but the Arab League is set to consider a Qatari-proposed Arab force Saturday. The Syrian government blames the unrest on extremists and terrorists, but has announced further concessions, including the approval of another political party and the day before the repeated offer of a general amnesty. Few in the anti-government movement have any faith in the measures, saying they are far too little, far too late. For the Arab League monitors, they've been overseeing the government's release of political prisoners. Asked how they can assure those released will not be thrown back into jail, one observer shrugged slightly and said, "We have their phone numbers." Elizabeth Arrett, VOA News, Damascus.
Yemen's foreign minister says next month's planned election to replace embattled President Ali Abdullah Saleh may be delayed because of security problems in the country. In an interview broadcast today on Al Arabiya television, Abu Bakr al-Kirbi said it will be difficult to hold the election on February 21st if Yemen does not resolve its security issues. Islamist militants linked to al-Qaeda took control of the central west Yemeni town of Raqqa on Sunday. They also control parts of southern Yemen's Abyan province. Mr. Saleh's critics have accused him of allowing Islamist militants to seize Yemeni towns and cities to bolster his claims that an end to his 33-year rule will lead to chaos. The autocratic Yemeni president has faced a year of mass protests by opposition activists demanding his ouster. President Barack Obama's cautious response to the popular uprising across the Middle East and North Africa has drawn frequent criticism. But a year after the Arab Spring protests began, some regional experts say the administration's strategy has paid off. VOA senior White House correspondent Dan Robinson reports.
December 17, 2010, in Tunisia, a street vendor, Mohamed Bouaziz, sets himself on fire in a protest against government policies and dies, becoming the catalyst for a Tunisian revolution and the Arab Spring. Within months, demonstrations arise in Egypt, Yemen, Bahrain, and Syria. Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak is ousted. And by year's end, Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi is dead. The U.S. and NATO provided air support to protect civilians against government forces in Libya. But the Arab Spring proved hard to predict. Leaders both friendly and unfriendly to the United States fell, and it wasn't until May that Mr. Obama firmly put the U.S. on the side of Arab reform.
We support political and economic reform in the Middle East and North Africa that can meet the legitimate aspirations of ordinary people throughout the region. Our support for these principles is not a secondary interest.
U.S. eventual support for the Arab Spring prompted criticism that the administration had not been as supportive of Iranian protesters in 2009. But U.S. presidents often face difficult decisions where revolutions are concerned, says Walter Russell Mead, professor of foreign affairs and humanities at Bard College.
I think the idea that an American president of any party can sort of figure out from day one the deep master plan for dealing with revolutionary transformations in half a dozen strategically important countries. You know, when you put it that way, you realize he can't.
Mr. Obama based U.S. policy on core principles, opposing violence, universal rights, and the right of people to choose their own leaders. Were his calculations correct? Yes, says Kurt Wertmuller, a researcher at the Hudson Institute Center for Religious Freedom.
I think we do have to address that. So there's been a relationship, there's been inspiration from one place to another, but every part of the Arab world is unique.
Samuel Tadros of the Hudson Institute says that while Mr. Obama was correct to not take a single blanket approach, rapidly moving events at times drove administration policies.
The administration's answer to the Arab Spring very much reflected this interest in not being sidelined by the events of history, of jumping into the wagon of what was obviously taking place. And thus, in many cases, this an initial cautiousness that should have been there was removed and people acted. The street was driving the reaction more than a coherent policy in that regard.
Tadros and other regional experts caution that events in the Middle East are part of a long-term transformation with risks including the potential rise of Islamism in Egypt and potential civil war in Syria. They say the process will take decades to play out and will remain a challenge for U.S. presidents. Dan Robinson, VOA News, the White House.
Are you looking for a comprehensive daily look at events reshaping the Middle East? Visit voanews.com/ME. You'll find VOA's original reporting from the region, in-depth analysis from our Washington team, VIP interviews, online polls, photo essays, and mini documentaries. Bookmark us or add us to your RSS reader. That's voanews.com/ME.
Thailand is investigating a Lebanese man accused of stockpiling illegal explosives. His detention came after the United States and other nations issued a terrorism warning for Bangkok. Thai authorities objected to the warning, making it a rare public rift between the counterterrorism allies. Daniel Sharp reports from Bangkok.
Thai investigators on Tuesday said they are still questioning Atras Hussein, a Lebanese man with Swedish citizenship detained last week at Bangkok's Suvarnabhumi airport. Authorities say they believe Hussein is linked to the Hezbollah militant group, which the United States considers a terrorist organization. Hezbollah denies he is a member. His detention was announced shortly after the U.S. Embassy issued a warning of a credible threat of a terrorist attack in Bangkok. Thai officials initially scolded the United States and several other Western nations that echoed the warning for not consulting them first. But on Monday, Thai police accused Hussein of possessing illegal explosives after he led them to a warehouse southwest of the capital, where they found tons of fertilizer and chemicals that can be used to make bombs. Despite the illegal haul, Thailand's police chief, Priyopan Damapong, insisted there never was a threat of a terrorist attack. He says officials are certain that Thailand is cleared from any attack, and they believe the country was just a transit point for the explosives. With all the evidence that they have and the intelligence reports, he says there is no real threat to Thailand's tourist spots, such as Khao San Road or anywhere else. However, he says police are still aware of the threat and will not underestimate the situation. Analysts say Thai authorities were not happy with the terrorism warning because of the potential impact on tourism and trade. Rohan Gunaratne is head of the International Center for Political Violence and Terrorism Research in Singapore. He says Hezbollah has demonstrated that it is a real threat to Thailand and the region.
The Lebanese Hezbollah has traditionally operated in Thailand. In fact, we have a number of cases of terrorists from the Lebanese Hezbollah group planning and preparing attacks in Thailand as well as in the region. In the mid-1990s, there were several plots by Lebanese Hezbollah that was uncovered. For example, there was a plan to hit the Israeli and the American embassies in Singapore and also in Thailand.
Gunaratne says Hezbollah was responsible for a failed car bomb attack on the Israeli embassy in 1994. It was only narrowly avoided after the truck packed with explosives was in a minor traffic accident and the driver fled the scene. At times, Thailand's anti-terrorism cooperation with the United States has been controversial. Thailand was alleged to be one of the first black sites where U.S. intelligence agents held and questioned terrorist leaders. Gunaratne says the U.S.-Thai anti-terrorism cooperation is essential to keeping Thailand and the region safe.
Americans have had sustained and continuous presence in Bangkok, funded and supported so many training programs and other forms of assistance to build counterterrorism capacity in Southeast Asia. And Thailand is in many ways a key node for that cooperation that has kept this region safe from terrorism.
Despite the arrest of Hussein and confiscated explosives, the U.S. Embassy said the terrorism warning issued Friday still stands. Thai media reports indicate Hussein had at least one accomplice who is still at large. Daniel Scharf, VOA News, Bangkok.
South Korea, the world's fifth largest importer of oil, says more discussions are necessary before it can make a decision on cutting purchases of Iranian crude oil. The United States is hoping its ally will join the sanctions campaign meant to put pressure on Iran to rein in its nuclear program. VOA correspondent Steve Herman reports from Seoul.
The South Korean government finds itself in a dilemma regarding Iran. As a meeting got underway with American officials here, the South Korean Deputy Foreign Minister, Kim Jae-shin, said that Seoul shares Washington's growing concern about Iran's nuclear development.
Recent situation related to Iranian nuclear issue has been getting worse since we met last month. But I assure you once again that the Korean government is committed to strongly support and participate in international efforts to resolve this issue.
But Kim also made clear that tougher action is controversial in South Korea.
Many Koreans are quite worried about that further strengthening sanctions against Iran at this time may destabilize the international market of crude oil and accordingly bring about some adverse effect on the Korean economy as well.
The U.S. State Department's Special Advisor for Non-Proliferation and Arms Control, Robert Einhorn, is leading the American delegation to Seoul. He says the sanctions on Tehran will also send a message to North Korea, which is pursuing nuclear programs as well in defiance of international agreements.
The ROK government is a global player in this regard. It knows that the situations in Iran and in North Korea are related. I think progress on one will help us achieve progress on another.
The two Koreas have no diplomatic relations and have remained technically at war since 3 years of devastating combat in the early 1950s. The United States maintains more than 28,000 troops in South Korea to help defend it. But South Korea is reliant on imports for all of its crude oil, and 250,000 barrels a day arrive from Iran. The U.S. team next visits Tokyo to apply the same pressure on another key economic and military ally in the region. Japan, also heavily dependent on imported crude, has been sending conflicting signals about whether it will support further sanctions on Iran. The sanctions are intended to pressure Tehran into serious negotiations over its nuclear program. A number of nations believe Iran is trying to develop nuclear weapons. The Islamic Republic contends its nuclear development is for peaceful purposes, not to make bombs. Steve Herman, VOA News, Seoul.
Computer hackers disrupted the websites of Israel's stock exchange and the national airline El Al, the latest attacks in what Israeli officials describe as cyber terrorism. Robert Berger reports from Jerusalem.
The cyber attacks began 10 days ago when a hacker claiming to be from Saudi Arabia posted the numbers and personal details of more than 20,000 Israeli credit card holders online. He said the aim is to harm Israel, and he called on fellow hackers to follow suit. Yoni Shemesh, the head computer technician at the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, said the facility was on high alert for cyber attacks because of perceived threats from Arab and pro-Palestinian hackers. Shemesh told Israel Radio that the website which provides data online was disrupted, but that the hackers were not able to penetrate the stock exchange itself, and trading was not affected. Even though Israel is one of the most advanced high-tech countries in the world, the attacks have exposed a vulnerability to cyber warfare. Technology Minister Daniel Hershkovitz says it is a dangerous situation and Israel is taking steps to deal with it.
Everyone has to prepare for such attacks, and indeed the State of Israel has established a special cyber organization to prepare for such things.
Israel fears that hackers could target strategic sites such as water, telephone, and electricity facilities or the international airport, posing a serious threat to national security. Robert Berger for VOA News, Jerusalem.
In Pakistan, Prime Minister Yusuf Raza Gilani has agreed to appear before the Supreme Court later this week to face a contempt notice for failing to reopen a graft case against President Asif Ali Zardari. The Supreme Court ordered Gilani to appear on Thursday. If convicted of contempt of court, Mr. Gilani could be sent to jail and removed from his post. The court initiated contempt proceedings against Gilani early Monday after the government failed to ask Swiss authorities to reopen a corruption case against the president that dates back to the 1990s and involves the jurisdiction of Swiss courts. Islamabad has refused, saying Mr. Zardari has immunity as the head of state. Hassan Askari Rizvi is an independent political analyst based in Lahore. He tells VOA's Sarah Williams the current dispute between the Supreme Court and the executive branch has reached a new level.
Well, it is very uncommon. There have been one instance in the past when the Supreme Court issued a similar notice to another elected prime minister. So this has happened in the past, but at the moment it has acquired greater significance because already there was tension between the Supreme Court and the executive, and with this notice, there is tension between the two state institutions. However, the decision of the Prime Minister to appear before the court has given some kind of sigh of relief that the situation may not be allowed to go out of control.
Why is that? Why is it as being seen as potentially not going out of control?
Well, I think had the Prime Minister not agreed to go to the court, then obviously things could have gone out of control. Even now, the chances are that there might be trouble. However, the latest development is that the Prime Minister has hired a well-known, well-recognized lawyer, Etazaz Ahsan, who is known for diffusing tension and trying to decrease conflict between the two. So it is hoped that the situation on 19th will be salvaged. However, until that happens, things can go in any direction. That kind of fear would continue to haunt Pakistan.
You mentioned that there have been a number of tensions between the Supreme Court and the executive. Is this about Mr. Zardari's the corruption allegations against him? Is that what that stems from?
So the current crisis is mainly because of that. The government position is that under the Constitution, it cannot initiate or pursue a criminal proceeding against the sitting president. However, Supreme Court claims that this constitutional provision has to be invoked before the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court will decide whether the president has the immunity. The government is saying it is very clearly written. So because of these two different perspectives, the Supreme Court has issued a contempt notice because the letter has not been written to Swiss authorities. So we will know on 19th of this month what kind of position the federal government will take on this issue, whether they would formally invoke the article of the Constitution or they would write the letter.
Finally, I wanted to ask, Mr. Zardari has had some health problems recently, and he's been having medical treatment outside the country. Is it perceived that he's still in control, or is the Prime Minister seen as being sort of Pakistan's leader?
Well, he appears to be in control of things as the president. We have seen him talking to media. However, under the Constitution of Pakistan, Prime Minister is the chief executive. However, the Zardari being party leader, party of the ruling party, he exercises more powers than any normal president under parliamentary system of government.
Hassan Askari Rizvi, an independent political analyst, speaking from Lahore. Pakistan's parliament this week passed a resolution expressing full support for Prime Minister Gilani's government, as well as for democracy and democratic institutions. Opposition members staged a walkout from the House during the vote. If you crave the latest news and analysis about the Middle East, follow us on our Twitter feed. You can find it by searching @VOA Middle East. Every day we tweet VOA's own special reports, analysis, VIP interviews, photo essays, and mini documentaries. Plus, you'll get the latest buzz from VOA's Mideast team and correspondents. VOA Middle East on Twitter. Get a read on the news before it happens. And up next is our weekly poll feature. Joining me is our Middle East online editor, Yuri Hiltaichuk, to sum up our last topic and share the results. Hi, Yuri. What do you have for us today?
Hi, Susan. Within the last few weeks, we have witnessed 2 deadly bombings in Damascus. The Syrian government has blamed them on terrorist suicide bombers, while some Syrian anti-regime groups believe that the incidents were orchestrated by the government to bolster its claims that terrorists are destabilizing the country. In our last poll, we tried to gauge public opinion on which of these 2 versions is more credible. And here are the results. More than 64% of our poll participants thought that the bombings were orchestrated. More than 18% thought that they were real terrorist attacks, and 16% of voters were not sure. These numbers are based on close to 1,800 votes that we received, and as always, I need to stress that this poll is not scientific.
So what are we going to be asking this coming week of our viewers?
Well, again, we'd like to stay on the subject of Syria, but this time we want to look at the crisis through a United Nations prism. There are those who say that the UN and especially its Security Council are ineffective in addressing such crises as the one that we're currently seeing in Syria. So we would like to know what changes in the UN Security Council, if any, do people think would make the body more effective in dealing with such situations? And we've provided a couple of response options and would like for people to share their views. And anybody can weigh in by casting their vote on our site, voanews.com/me. Again, that's voanews.com/me, and we'll meet here again in a week with the results.
Well, thank you very much, Yuri.
My pleasure, Susan.
This has been VOA's Middle East Monitor. Join us Monday through Friday for news from the region and of interest to the region. Coming up on International Edition, 2 of Asia's top leaders call for the international community to do more to promote sustainable energy, amid fears that tighter sanctions on Iran could affect global oil supplies. Thanks for tuning in to the Voice of America.
For more on the stories you've heard on our radio programs, visit our website at voanews.com. That's where you'll find in-depth reports, related stories, videos, and more from our team of correspondents. Or take the news with you by downloading podcasts of your favorite VOA program. That's at voanews.com.
voanews.com.
Online news for a changing world.